the newsagents.
The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight. There is much to learn and reflect on, and I take responsibility for the loss. To the many good, hard-working Conservative candidates who lost tonight, despite their tireless efforts, their local records of delivery, and their dedication to their communities, I am sorry. I will now head down to London, where I will say more about tonight's result before I leave the job of Prime Minister, to which I have given my all. I will then return here, to my family's home, and I look forward to spending more time with you all in the weeks, months, and years ahead.
On Tuesday, it was Rishi Sunak saying it's not over till it's over. At 4:45 this morning, it was over. And it sounded like a humbled, contrite, sad ex-Prime Minister speaking.
It was a moment of pure dignity in what has, in many ways, been the weirdest election night I can remember. And we should say the headline is a Labour landslide. Labour have crossed the threshold and Keir Starmer becomes the first person to take his party from opposition to government in 27 years. That is the headline. But wait till we tell you just what has been going on. Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And it's 5:01 in the morning and we're together at this time of day like we always are.
Well, Emily's always awake at this time of the
I'm
morning,
so
it's not weird
happy
for her.
you've joined me. I'm just waiting for the shipping news
Lewis
to
has
start.
still got his tie on. I've taken
Well, it's
my
a
tie
solemn
off.
occasion, John.
And it has been the most remarkable night because, yeah, the headline is Labour landslide. The second headline is Reform did really well. The third headline is disaster for the SNP. Fourth headline, bloody hell, what a weird election with all sorts of odd
You
results.
haven't even mentioned the Conservatives.
Yes.
And we haven't even mentioned the exit poll. And having told our viewers how incredibly stable these exit polls now are, we are now in the middle of finding out. I mean, we are, dare I say, to use a wonderful metaphor, on our own journey. But we do not yet know whether that exit poll that we saw at 10 o'clock is actually going to make sense by the end of the results night.
But by the time you're listening to this, what we can be certain of is this. Keir Starmer has enough seats to form a majority. As we come on, he's at 326. It's going to be, almost certainly going to be, the Conservatives' worst performance in history. Both in terms of vote share, which is way down, probably around 24%. Bear in mind, before today, the lowest they'd ever got was 30% with John Major in 1997. In terms of seats, they're going to do worse than in 1997. Rishi Sunak is therefore the biggest loser in Conservative electoral history. Keir Starmer, by contrast, is going to do probably nearly as well as Tony Blair did in 1997 in terms of the overall seat number. He therefore becomes only one of four Labour leaders, only four in their entire history, to lead the Labour Party to an absolute majority following Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson and Tony Blair. It is an historic achievement.
Yeah.
But
and we should maybe just say, I mean, we will talk about the big themes, but just to focus in on a couple of extraordinary results that are coming through to us now. People who have lost their seats. Now, you might have heard about the big cabinet beast by now. Jacob Rees-Mogg has lost his seat in Somerset. Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, has lost her seat. We've heard that Lucy Fraser in Cambridgeshire has lost her seat. Penny Mordaunt has lost her seat. But I wonder if you've also heard about Jonathan Ashworth, who was expecting to join the cabinet today, who was expecting to be Labour's Paymaster General, perhaps, who has lost his seat to an independent. I wonder if you know how much the what they call the Palestine penalty vote seems to have affected people like Wes Streeting and Jess Phillips, incredibly popular Labour members, Labour MPs who've been everywhere.
Wes Streeting in Ilford survived by 500 votes.
Yeah.
This is a seat where he should have been weighing the votes and instead survives by 500, and that will be that is true of a clutch of seats which Labour have lost to independent candidates almost exclusively in constituencies with big Muslim populations, and they've lost it on Gaza. The initial Labour policy on Gaza and the language adopted in particular by Keir Starmer on LBC has been, and we reported it a bit in terms of our own reporting in Birmingham Ladywood in the run-up to the election, has been catastrophic for Labour in those seats. Overall, of course, numerically it won't matter too much, but it's been catastrophic in a series of safe Labour seats.
And that's why there are so many wrinkles in this election which kind of take you by surprise. You know, not just if Labour are going to win by a landslide, you expect that all the key people on Labour's front bench are going to storm home. But Tanguy Debonair, the Shadow Culture Secretary, who would have been the Culture Minister, she's lost her seat in Bristol to the Greens. And there are all sorts of odd areas where there are now more independents in Parliament who have been elected as independents, like Corbyn, who have got their seats.
Talking of Corbyn, we're not. It's 5:05 and we're going to hear from the Labour leader himself, Keir Starmer, the man who is going to be Britain's next Prime Minister.
We were told that we're all in it together. I say to the British people today, imagine what we can do if that were actually true. So, by all means, enjoy this moment. Nobody can say you haven't waited patiently. Enjoy the feeling of waking up on a morning like this, with the emotion that you do see the country through the same eyes. Hold on to it, because it is what unity is made from. But use it to show to the rest of the country, as we must, that this party has changed, that we will serve them faithfully, govern for every single person in this country.
So he's going to govern for all the country. Of course he is. It's dizzying what lies ahead of him in the next 72 hours. You know, I'm sure briefings from MI5, MI6. He's going to be on a plane to Washington before you can, you know, in the next 48 hours because of the NATO summit. Yeah. He's got to find his way into Downing Street. He's got to move his family in. It's just absolutely goes at warp speed when you are a new Prime Minister in this country. But the dignified transfer of power speaks well of Britain. The last big election I covered...
You are so scarred, aren't you?
November 2020, January the 6th, 2021. Yeah. Those are the dates that stick in my mind where you think, oh my God, democracy can go wrong. Democracy has gone right tonight in that sense. But I've never felt that the anchoring to the main political parties of Labour and Conservative has been so weak.
And we are probably now looking at something that feels more like a four-party system, because even in the places and more, and that's before you get to the independents. I mean, we haven't talked about the SNP. We are still waiting for the bulk of the Scottish seats to come through. But those predictions have been absolutely terrifying, that the party who has been the government of Scotland for 17 years, that has seen the dizzy heights of the 50s, 48 seats they had before dissolution, may end up with somewhere between 6 and 10 seats tonight.
And that was a bad result for the SNP, even in the old days, like pre-2015, when they used to just do well in Aberdeenshire and rural places. The Labour Party, I mean, this is another big headline from tonight. The Labour Party is back in Scotland in a big way. It has almost completely revivified. It is dominated. It is dominating in Scotland once again. And so you have to say that in terms of the big story, one of the big stories, one of the big themes that we've covered in the last 14 years, which has been the rise of Scottish independence, it's not to say that independence is dead, because that still polls well, but in terms of the SNP's ability to get there, they've not had a worse night for 10 years.
We have to mention the bungee jump policy, which seems to be bringing in its own rewards. Ed Davey, who started off the night with 11 MPs, Lib Dems, appears to be on track to get 5 times that minimum.
They could be on track to get their best result since, or the Liberals, let's put it that way, since 1923, since Asquith was the leader of the Liberal Party.
Charles Kennedy was the person who basically got them to 60, right?
Yeah. Some of the swings that we're seeing in this election, away from the Conservative Party, towards Labour and the Lib Dems, in target seats, are astounding. I mean, the Lib Dems are managing to win in seats. I mean, take Chichester, for example, which was Gillian Keegan's seat, the Education Secretary. Should be absolutely safe as houses as a constituency. It has not been anything other than Conservative since 1923. Last time it was Liberal, it was in 1923. They won it on a huge swing. Yeah. They have been able to. We are clearly seeing something we talked about in terms of tactical voting. We are seeing huge tactical voting going the Lib Dems' way, and they have been extremely effective in turning out their target seats, in particular across the southeast of England in former Conservative strongholds.
So let's talk about reform now, because Nigel Farage enters the race late, goes to Clacton. We're there when he launches, and of course he has won absolutely hands down in Clacton. So he is now in Parliament. Lee Anderson has won. Richard Tice has won. And so reform and a right-wing, anti-immigrant, populist, nationalist party is now in the House of Commons with a number of Conservative MPs kind of quite attracted, which raises whole sorts of questions about the future of the Conservative Party and whether it could even split. But Nigel Farage was saying this is just the start.
It's not just disappointment with the Conservative Party. There is a massive gap on the centre-right of British politics, and my job is to fill it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. But it's not just what we do in Parliament as a national party that matters, it's what we do out round the country. Getting 5,000 people in that room in Birmingham last week, the energy, the optimism, the enthusiasm, the belief that Westminster is just completely out of touch with ordinary people says to me that my plan is to build a mass national movement over the course of the next few years and hopefully be big enough to challenge the general election properly in 2029. What is interesting is there's no enthusiasm for Labour, there's no enthusiasm for Starmer whatsoever. In fact, about half of the vote is simply an anti-Conservative vote. This Labour government will be in trouble very, very quickly.
So that is, I would say, a veiled threat, but it's not really a veiled threat. It is a threat to Labour. And to be fair, Nigel Farage has a point, because they have 3 seats as of 12 minutes past 5 this morning, Friday. But they've also come second in places right across the northeast, these very safe Labour heartlands where they have overtaken the Conservatives. They've pushed the Tories into third place, and they are looking like they are snapping at Labour's heels. So for every seat that they did get, there are others they didn't get where their share of the vote is still phenomenal, sometimes on over 30%.
For Labour, it means that the issue of immigration has to be taken really seriously if you are going to see off the threat of reform. You just have to look at what's happened in France over the past 22 years of the rise of the far right in France. Each election getting higher and higher.
I mean, you guys covered this just last weekend.
Yeah.
Do you think that the reform vote has been helped by what's happened in France just last week?
I'm not sure how much notice reform voters in the UK have taken of what's happening in France.
I think it's just the same phenomenon.
But I think it's the same phenomenon.
Yeah.
I think it's people who feel that the system has let them down, that there are too many foreigners in the country taking their jobs, that their livelihoods, the cost of living, everything, and they just blame it all on this simple thing. And Farage is capitalising on that.
And Farage absolutely sees it as the same phenomenon. And we can bet our bottom dollar that if we think the Tories have had a tough time on immigration and what's gone on in the Channel in this Parliament, you just wait.
Yeah.
Right? Because we know that basically, to be honest, the Labour offer on immigration is pretty threadbare. Rwanda's gone. Okay, that wouldn't have made much of a difference. But the concerted forces of Farage in Parliament, a highly kind of radicalised Conservative Party in Parliament as well, which we can talk about in a bit, and the press coming together on small boats is going to be a chorus in the next Parliament. And Starmer is going to have something to say because, we're clearly going to move into a Parliament now. Again, I think another equivalent to Macron is that Starmer, a bit like Macron, has found himself unwittingly as the kind of slayer of the centre-right, right? He's going to be the midwife of actually a more radicalised right-wing in this country because he's created such a massive election victory. And that means that, paradoxically enough, politics could end up being dragged onto territory that the Labour Party and Keir Starmer doesn't much like. And he's going to have an answer to that.
Yes.
And he's going to have a strategy in terms of communicating on that.
I agree, but conversely, yes, he has to work out what he's going to say on illegal immigration that isn't Rwanda. But he also has to maybe think about what he's going to say on legal immigration, which suggests he does what Scotland does. which is to embrace the fact that the country needs more people coming in. He can't mention freedom of movement, we know that. He can't reopen the Brexit debate. He's made that very clear. There will not be, customs union and all the rest of it. But maybe he actually has to be grown up about immigration, and maybe the way to solve the problem is not to say, we're going to beat it, we're going to send immigrants away. It's to say, OK, do you want to have the honest conversation about it? We need people to come in and do the jobs that we cannot fill ourselves.
But this is the thing, right? Starmer, it's going to require some deafness in the next parliament, because the new PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, is going to have different cohorts of MPs, some of whom have got Reform as their second place opposition, some of whom have got Greens as their second place opposition, some of whom have got the SNP as their second place opposition. So this is the kind of cost of winning so big, in a sense, but not just the cost of winning so big. It is reflective of something we've been saying from the start. We have now got this smorgasbord, this weird electoral geography, right? Yeah, this weird electoral geography. Back in the old days, it was very clear. Labour, if they won a big majority, the Conservatives were second place in most of the seats that they held. So they knew who their opponent was. Now you have different opponents in different places, and that requires a refracted politics, a different sort of politics, in order to navigate through it. And can Keir Starmer do it? Who knows?
So those are the challenges for Keir Starmer. But reunifying the Conservative Party, we're going to talk about that in a moment. And it is confirmed there will be no Conservative MPs in Wales. So, wither the Conservative Party. Tonight, I think 8 cabinet ministers have lost their jobs. Jacob Rees-Mogg is out. Therese Coffey out. Some of the biggest names of Conservative politics have been slaughtered in the carnage of Labour's victory. Some of those people would have considered themselves as potential future Tory leaders, like Penny Mordaunt, who lost her seat in Portsmouth North by a very narrow margin, but she lost. She's out of the race. And the question is, who are the people that are now standing? Where does it leave the balance of the Conservative Party? And what do they do next?
It was very interesting listening to both Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman accept their, renomination. And they both basically made pitches for the leadership within seconds of thanking their team. Very gracious from Kemi. Quite interesting, well done, Keir, you've won a thing. I can't wait to be your opposition leader. She didn't say that. That was my praising. And then Suella was like, I'm so sorry you've all been let down by them. And you're like, sorry,
who do you mean?
I just got whiplash. Who? Not you. You were the Home Secretary. No, but them. And so we will start to see the rebuilding. Jenrick is also back in, former immigration minister, very close to Suella at one point. But then on the other side, you've got Jeremy Hunt just managing to cling on. A man who fought tooth and nail for just about every single vote for that seat in Godalming and Ash and Surrey against the Lib Dems.
Just before you go on, is he a force? Because isn't he too closely associated now with the absolute abject failure of the Sunak project?
Yeah, no, I don't think he is. He's tried twice for the leadership. He hasn't been very successful at all. But I'm just, I guess in a way, I'm talking about wings.
Yeah,
I haven't heard. Look, it feels to me like the 3 potentially big forces in terms of a Conservative leadership are all on the right. So we've got Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick hanging on. Maybe if Cleverly wins his seats, he's sort of on the centre of the party. Maybe he could make a run for it. But with a parliamentary party that small, of like 140-ish MPs, obviously each individual MP becomes more important. The exact kind of constellation of MPs who are left becomes really important, not only in terms of actually nominating the final 2 to go through to the Tory membership, but what happens next? Because we now know if there's like 140 MPs, you're only going to need like 20 MPs or so to trigger a leadership election in the parliamentary party. So it's bound to be unstable. But it doesn't feel to me, generally speaking, the candidate of the right wins a Tory leadership contest. I cannot see a world.
Ian Duncan Smith actually is back in Chingford and Woodford Green. Never say never.
But I can't see a world in which, when Nigel Farage is breathing down the neck, when rightly or wrongly they are saying that Reform and the rise of Reform split their vote in a load of constituencies, which cost them a load of seats. I cannot see a world where, and we know that the Tory party membership have moved further and further to the right. I can't see a world basically where the candidate who is farthest to the right, whoever that is, does not win.
No, but I think you can see a situation in which becoming that close or in the pocket of Reform becomes so unpalatable to a serious tranche of the Conservative Party that they go their own way.
But that's
that
their
you
conversation
end up
again.
having, a one Tory sort of grouping and a kind of jump into bed with Farage grouping, and they fight it out.
But that's the conversation they're going to have now, isn't it? The conversation they're going to have is, what do we do? We've
The
lost
new
a chunk of
Conservatives.
seats in the southeast to the Lib Dems, who have clearly run to our left. We've lost a chunk of seats to Labour in the north and the Midlands, partly because of the rise of Reform to our right. What do we do? It's advice.
Do we know where our dear former leader Liz Truss is at the moment?
We are waiting to hear, but we're not hearing good things. But we're, in terms of her
Southwest Norfolk
chances.
seat, yeah.
Southwest
I
Norfolk.
would be upset just for what she gives the Newsagents podcast if she is no longer at Westminster. I will
I
shed
don't
a
think
little
she's at
tear.
Westminster very often, though, to be fair. She's
Yeah,
more
but
often
she,
sort
okay,
of
but when
hanging
she's
out with
CPAC,
Steve Bannon and
Steve Bannon,
criminals.
Steve
Should we go? Should we be able to go and visit Steve Bannon in prison? That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Can we just take one moment just to Emily, you just talked about how at the very start about how weird these results are, right?
Yeah.
Like Labour tonight won Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. That has been a Conservative seat since 1820, right? And yet it's losing in Leicester to the Conservatives because of the split vote with, again, as Gaza vote. Like these results, it feels like the sort of left, the centre and the right of politics is kind of fracturing at the same time.
Well, I don't-
There's no such thing. I think one thing you can take from this, right, for this election and future elections, there is no such thing anymore as a safe seat.
Okay.
The electorate is too volatile
I
for
think
your
it's
seat
not
to be
just
considered
about
safe.
left and right fracturing. I think it is about personality politics coming through in a way that has become much easier with social media.
Yeah,
so if
totally.
you want to stand like your mate Yaqub,
Not mate, but yeah.
in Birmingham, Ladywood, or you see what's happening in Blackburn now,
Yeah.
another independent character coming in, you had no chance without
Totally.
a party machine behind you before TikTok, before social media, before, the Tate brothers, as in the case of George Galloway, sort of giving you, money and funding and all the rest of it. Now you're seeing these personalities, and I say personalities, advisedly in speech marks, because I'm not saying that they will all be around for very long, but they're getting the votes,
We'll
right?
never have seen so many independents elected. I
Yes.
mean, this is an extraordinary.
And I think it
Labour-
also
an
speaks
independent
to
has
the
taken
fact,
Blackburn, by the way.
as you
Yeah.
were saying, every time you go and hear from people on the doorstep, they say, right, we hate the government of the day, but we don't really know who to vote for. Now, if an independent comes along and says those immortal words, they're all the same, vote for me, maybe you go with it.
An independent has taken Blackburn.
She said that.
Oh, right,
You're
I've-
not listening. You're too busy on your phone.
Give me your next one. Come on.
It's his
another
5
one.
a.m.
Well, no, I tell
Batley,
you,
I think, they're also in trouble, aren't they? There's
Dewsbury has been lost.
Yeah.
Dewsbury and Batley to an
The
independent.
other-
Again, anti-Gaza.
the other thing you're saying about the disillusionment.
I'm not sure we
That-
say anti-Gaza.
Oh, sorry, an anti-Labour Gaza position vote.
Yeah.
Come on then, John. What's next? Are you going to give us Sunderland, are you?
No, I was going to say something about the disillusionment and disenchantment of the British electorate, and that's manifested itself as well in the lower turnout. Which is,
Yes.
you kind of want
I
more.
thought that would be. I was really hoping that would be wrong.
Yeah, me
Because
too.
I wanted democracy to be flourishing. It always makes you feel great as a country when lots of people vote. However they vote, you want them all to go
Looks
out
like
and
it's
vote.
going to be the lowest since 2005. But we've
Yeah.
been reporting the whole time, haven't we, on this apathy that is very profound.
No, I didn't think we were. I thought we were noticing that there was a huge number of young voters coming out for the first time. Maybe that didn't happen, or maybe it just was offset by people who have always voted and didn't bother.
But in that context of a lower turnout, what is remarkable is that Labour have managed to get this majority of like 170. On a lower share of the votes, they'll get probably about 36 or 37% of the vote, which is very low by historic standards for an incoming government. But they've done it because, and it is you can say a vindication of the Morgan McSweeney, Labour's chief strategist strategy, which is it is just so well distributed.
It is
in
a machine.
all the
Yeah.
right places. As opposed to in the Jeremy Corbyn days, they got 40% of the vote, but it was all in the same places, which as we know in our system is punishing. So you got seats like Cannock, they're getting like a 25% swing in Cannock. That's what you usually get in by-elections, not in general elections. It's astonishing.
I mean, rightly, we have drawn attention to the fact that it hasn't been a particularly exciting Labour campaign, but the mechanics,
Yeah.
the machinery of
Ruthless.
has
Phenomenal.
been absolutely phenomenal. The micro-targeting, there's the data that they've got on.
We had Harriet Harman on, and she said, I mean, just this one thing, she said, I've been getting trains to places that I've never been to before from train stations. I never went to Victoria to get trains south. I never went to Aldershot before. I never visited Hampshire. We're going down the M3.
Labour Aldershot.
That's the thing. They have played this extraordinary game. And I guess the question is, I mean, there is an irony, isn't there, for Keir Starmer, that he came in post Jeremy Corbyn and said, I will not lose the Jewish vote. I will not let anti-Semitism tarnish my reputation. I will not let it destroy the Labour Party. And he now finds himself in a position where the seats that he's losing have been to people who are very, predominantly anti-Israel and pro-Gaza.
Tom Tugendhat's kept his seat. So if there's going to be a one nation...
A one-man, one-nation
candidate
body, it's him.
from the One Nation wing of the Tory party, the left of the Tory party, it will probably be him. But I don't really see where he gets the support in the party, but it will probably be him.
We will be back after the break with Luke Trill from More in Common, who's been our pollster throughout the campaign.
Well, Luke Trill from More in Common has just walked in. Last time we saw you, you looked terribly nervous, Luke, and I have to say you're looking slightly more relaxed now. It's kind of worked, what you've done. Your MRP, I think, put the Tories on... just around the 130 mark?
Yeah, just under on 126. And it looks like that is close-ish to where they're going to end up. I mean, one of the things I should say is that all of us who've been involved in putting together these MRP models did not predict the kind of splintering of the votes that we've seen, and particularly those independent candidates. We had Jeremy Corbyn winning in Islington North, but we didn't predict some of these other results.
That is the fundamental problem with an MRP, isn't it? Yeah. That you cannot go into each constituency and find out who's standing.
And there are so many individual stories in individual constituencies. There's the Corbyn story. There's Ian Duncan Smith holding on in Chingford and Woodford Green because, Labour getting rid of its candidate and putting in a new one, and this vote splitting. And, and then the anti-Gaza...
Well, that is part of the Gaza story, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess that is.
And so is Yvonne Ridley, who was standing in Newcastle Central, who sort of comes back and starts taking a share of the vote there.
Well, and even Keir Starmer, in his seat, nearly 8,000 votes for the independent there. So, I was tweeted earlier that what we're seeing is British politics splintering left, right and centre, quite genuinely. And I think what we're going to see now is clearly a very big Labour majority, but on really quite shaky foundations. And from day one, they're going to find this challenge from reform on the right. And I think it's undeniable now that some former Labour voters in that sort of 2015 to 2019 period, rather than coming back to Labour, went to reform. And they're going to face a challenge on their left from Greens, some of these independents. So it's going to be a really tricky balancing act.
Just talk to us, as we're speaking to you at 5:30 in the morning, we haven't seen the big picture in Scotland. Do we think that the SNP figures are going to be as dire as we heard at the beginning of the night, around 10?
I mean, it certainly looks very bad for the SNP. Labour have been outperforming the swings in Scotland that the exit poll might have suggested. One bright spot for the SNP, though, was their Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, talked about as a future First Minister, potentially.
And called it the Starmer tsunami. That was his phrase.
That was his way. And he just hung on, but a really bad night for the SNP. And it looks like the SNP will lose a greater proportion of their seats than the Tories have lost.
We're just hearing that the Green leader has won, the co-leader has won in Norfolk, Waveney Valley. That was pretty much, I mean, they've done very well. Extraordinary that Caroline Lucas stepped down saying, I got too lonely, and would now have 3 colleagues, I guess, right?
Yeah, 3 colleagues again.
And Wales, we haven't touched on. I mean, it sounds like Plaid might do quite well in Wales. Is that right?
Yeah, it looks like Plaid is slightly exceeding expectations. The Tories wiped off the map, it looks like, in Wales. Labour obviously doing really well, pulling back some of their heartlands there. A good reform vote in Wales as well. But again, if you look at Wales, it's that story of splintering. Again, right across the political landscape, we're seeing this splintering.
And just a few moments ago, we were talking about turnout and disappointing, because you always want more people to want to go to the polling station. It's the great kind of moment for us in politics that we have to say, and a lot of people just stayed away.
A lot of people stayed away, and actually my overarching reflection from this election is that it was our focus groups which got the story more than the polls, because in every one of those focus groups they would start off with how they didn't trust politicians, they didn't think politicians could make a difference to the country, but basically it was a sense of futility. And I think you're seeing that reflected across the board, both in terms of the disappointing turnout but also in that turn away from the mainstream parties. And day one, Keir Starmer's going to have to address that language about service, about delivery, is now going to have to become reality.
Well, look, what a terrible job to have. I mean, you wouldn't wish it on anyone, would you, really?
But as we speak, Rishi Sunak is on his way back to London. He will be resigning the office. He will be having more to say about his defeat. Keir Starmer will be off to the palace to kiss the ring of the king. And
we will be back. The newsagents will be back with all that at
lunchtime.
Lunchtime-ish.
So you're going back to a TV studio now. I might try and get maybe 3 hours kit, but I won't kit because, of course, I'll be watching what's happening and I'll be too wired to go to sleep. And then we're back in this studio again in about 6 hours' time.
Luke, you're very welcome to join us.
Yeah.
I'm also going to try and get some
Thank you for everything.
No. It's been an absolute pleasure, and particularly your listeners who've got in touch with us over the campaign. We've really enjoyed their feedback too.
So, newsagents, we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.